Shall we dive in?
I think we should, just because otherwise we'll just talk about it.
And then be like, oh shit, we should have hit record.
We should have saved this. This is gold. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seriously Loco, the Seriously Crazy fan podcast for El Paso Locomotive FC, a proud member of the Beautiful Game Network, and brought to you by Roughneck Scarves and Icarus FC. I am your host, Phil Bakke, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Mikka Burrell. Mikka, wow, big one today.
Huge. Yeah. What a Christmas miracle. It's December 9th, and we know who will lead Locomotive in Season 4.
Yeah, John Hutchinson announced as the new Locomotive boss headed into the new season, and we will get on to that and talk in depth about the new appointment by Mountain Star Sports Group and El Paso Locomotive to that head coach and technical director job. Before we get there, we'll do just a little bit of admin. First and foremost, if this is your first time finding Seriously Loco, we're available on all the major podcast platforms, and you can like, subscribe, follow, whatever the platform allows. And if the platform allows you to rate and review, if you enjoy the podcast, give us a rating, and it helps spread the love. And you can find us on social media at Seriously Loco on Twitter, and then at Seriously_Loco, I believe, on Instagram.
Yeah,
both are active and valid. So check us out on social media. And Mikka, you got the writing muscles flexed recently and got the Patreon back up and firing.
Yes. I did a speculative piece, I guess you can call it, on kind of what Locomotive needs in the transfer market, what I think are the areas of need in the squad, and I proposed some, wish list, some transfers for the holiday wish list for Seriously Loco. And actually, the piece is kind of aging like fine wine. Like I'm not to toot my own horn, but like we'll get on to kind of what our new gaffer is looking into in terms of tactics. But have a look at that. And I know Phil will start writing as well too. Christian's put up a couple pieces there in the past, so we're really gonna try and be a bit more active on Patreon, and we appreciate all the new patrons that resubscribed. Obviously, it's so appreciated, and all the money that we get from that goes right into the show. So yeah, we'll keep trying to put content on there for y'all. Yeah, and like Mikka said, her piece is aging extremely well, and I think one of the finest compliments that it's gotten so far is John from USL Tactics. Did a really cool thread highlighting, how he envisioned some of the pieces fitting in at Locomotive, and this was obviously ahead of John's appointment as the manager. So now it's added even more context to the piece, and certainly we'll take some more looks at that. And I'm really interested to see how the squad develops. But definitely check out Mikka's piece, and then I'll hopefully have a piece up about the new manager here before the weekend or maybe beginning of next week, depending on how how my Friday goes. But fair enough.
But with all of that being said, I think it's time to dive in and talk the new manager. So John Hutchinson, as we said, announced today as the new manager and technical director for El Paso Locomotive FC. So taking on the full mantle of the opening that Mark left. And the announcement today made via press conference by, virtually, obviously in these times, but Alan Ledford and Andrew Forrest from the club led the press conference, and John joined all the way from Australia, his native land, where him and his family are at now. But Mikka, I mean, just in the initial impressions, before we kind of dive into the background on John, and I think just like the way I was thinking about this, you know, there were some people that we had maybe speculated and maybe some of the more kind of like obvious choices that were out there in terms of coaches who have been successful in the different tiers of the American game right now. Mountain Star end up going pretty far afield to find John. And so what's your initial reaction to the appointment, and how are you feeling about this move?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to give a shout out to Roberto Silva over at the Striker for breaking the story that it was John Hutchinson, of course, and that was probably around 11 Mountain Time. So a couple hours before the press conference was set to begin. My initial reaction was, who is this person? Which in retrospect is a good thing, because I think the candidates that you and I spoke about, like you said, were the, I suppose, obvious candidates, people that are already in the league, are known quantities in U.S. soccer. And while John does have soccer, experience here in USL and, in the States, I like the fact that this move, we couldn't have predicted it.
Right.
It tells me that the club were doing their due diligence and really launched a worldwide search for the right person. So, obviously, it remains to be seen how exactly it's going to go, because on paper things can look like the stars have all aligned. But of course, what happens on the pitch is going to be most important. And, we just have to wait to see that. But, after the name, came across our timeline, I obviously researched him furiously, and I have to say I'm impressed. I think his resume is pretty impressive. I know we'll get onto that in a little bit more detail, but I like the move overall. I think it's very brave and adventurous and kind of out of left field, and I like that because I think we saw, certain teams in USL kind of promoting from within, which isn't always a bad thing, but it's, a bit unimaginative. So I like that we went in a different direction and tried to find someone that is committed to another project here the same way that Mark Lowry was. And, this guy is coming from literally around the world with his family to settle here in El Paso. And that shows me that he's dedicated to making something here, making something exciting and becoming ingrained in the community. So, yeah,
I similarly, and I think if anyone, I think we may have had a a joking mention at one point that I've been calling for Hutchinson for years, which I do appreciate. Yeah. But I think everyone would be forgiven for not necessarily being familiar with a manager coming in who has relatively limited managerial experience, in the sense that he hasn't been the head guy very, very often. But in researching the background, and as we dive into his history a little bit, one of the impressive things about John is, one, kind of the breadth of his experience in terms of different countries, different leagues, different systems, and but also the personalities that he's interacted with along the way, and the people who he's been mentored by along the way. There's some pretty notable names on that list throughout his career. And obviously, I think his boss at Yokohama is probably the most notable of those. But as we dove into his background and his history, there's some interesting stuff there from a managerial perspective.
Yeah, for sure. From a managerial perspective, he was a assistant at Central Coast Mariners, where he's actually the all-time appearance maker for the club as a player. Like we said, he's got experience here. Worked for Seattle Sounders back when they were when their development team was called S2. Obviously, we know them as Tacoma Defiance now.
Yeah.
Worked as a development manager there in the academy as an assistant manager. And then, like you said, at Yokohama F. Marinos, who are a top flight side in J1, which is the Japanese top flight. And yeah, he worked under Ange Postecoglou, who is the Celtic boss.
Yeah.
Who succeeded Neil Lennon after a pretty fraught spell there in Glasgow. So yeah, I mean he's got just a really diverse resume, if you will. As a manager, as an assistant, all that. But I think it was really interesting too how he had a nearly 20-year playing career as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that is different from Mark Lowry. I think Mark went into coaching relatively quickly in his career, and didn't play at like top level, whereas John played for, like we said, Central Coast Mariners, who are in the A League in the Australian top flight, and he made over almost 230 appearances for the club. So
yeah, I think he was there for like 7 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And like I said, leads the club in overall appearances. Also got 11 caps with the Malta national team, which is a UEFA country. They've never made the World Cup or anything like that, but or the Euros. But that's pretty awesome that he's also an international. So just a really, really fascinating background. And I think he's got like a really, really interesting, varied resume.
Yeah, I really like the fact that he basically got a job at, he was recognized, I guess, enough to get a job as an assistant at Central Coast Mariners, like straight after playing for them. It's not necessarily like a common thing to just land an assistant job in a top flight team straight after you're done playing. And then when he was with Sounders too, he was the assistant of Ezra Hendrickson, who was just hired by the Chicago Fire as their manager. So he has ties, kind of at the MLS level to managers. And then, as you said, Ange Postecoglou is just like, Celtic are into the knockouts of the Europa League and look a far different prospect from the Celtic of this last era, which Steven Gerrard beat to the title with Rangers famously last year. And so anyways, I just really am excited by the amount of connections that he has, and then the amount of quality managers that he's worked with, even in an assistant role. And I think it just speaks to a quality when we noticed something about his time at Marinos, that he was a known quantity with supporters of Yokohama F. Marinos.
Yeah, after Postecoglou announced that he was going to leave to take the Celtic job, he stayed behind with the caretaker manager and with Kevin Muscat, the one who ended up coming in being the permanent manager. But when he left Yokohama, go see it for yourself. Go see the tweet where he announced that he was leaving, and also the tweet from the club. There are dozens of replies of Yokohama fans just like beside themselves with the notion of him leaving. He was very, very popular among the supporters there, and they did finish second in J1. They finished second in the table. They're one of the, I think, only two teams to never be relegated from the Japanese top flight. So, this is a serious job he had with, like we said, Paso Locomotive, who is the most legendary manager in Australia's history. So yeah, it's nothing to shake a stick at. And I mean, this in particular really excites me as an Arsenal fan because, the most legendary manager in our history went to Japan and cut his teeth there before coming over. He was with Nagoya Grampus 8, before coming over to Arsenal, and everyone treated it like a joke. Like, who is this guy? Like, he's coming from Japan. What? Do they play football over there? And Ange Postecoglou unfortunately got similar treatment. I mean, Rangers fans were bantering the hell out of the announcement when Celtic announced that they were bringing Postecoglou over from Japan. This is not a Celtic pod, but I think it's worth mentioning the kind of parallels there. So I think in our context with John coming over from the Japanese top flight, I don't think we should treat it like a joke, because the Japanese league has been shown to be a breeding ground for good coaches. Yeah,
and I think it's just interesting to see when, and I haven't watched a ton of J League. I can hold my hands up pretty, I feel comfortable saying that. But just because you don't watch a league doesn't mean that there isn't inherent quality in it. And that ultimately is where I would caution Locomotive fans from writing off any experience in Japan or Australia, or these leagues do have quality personalities in them, and as you said, even back to the early 90s, when the J League has come a long way, I think, since then. But even then, for a manager like Arsene Wenger to feel like it was a developmental step, like that is a very
sure.
Yeah, so it says a lot, I think, about the league. So, as we said, John announced in a press conference today, he was bravely on quite early in the morning. Tomorrow.
That was brutal. Tomorrow.
In Australia. And one of the things that struck me about him in this initial press conference was how forthcoming he was about not just his style of play, because I think every manager in those initial press conferences talks about the style that they want to bring to the team and what they're really looking to bring. And a lot of people will say things like they want to bring excitement, they want to play a good brand of football, they want to excite the fans, they want to score goals. He took it a level further, and he was talking about more than just the style of play. He was talking about like how he wanted to get there.
He was very forthcoming about his tactics, his ideas for the transfer market. I mean, he came out and said, I want to play a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3. I want to get some wingers. I want speed. I want pace in this team. And one of the journalists asked him, yeah, that's cool, but what about like the defensive aspects of the game? And he said, I want to have the ball. I want to press. I want to high press, want to have the ball, I want to win it back as quickly as possible. I mean, he was very, very clear about his ideas. And I don't think you get that a whole lot, because I think in this day and age with social media and all that, and the fact that people can just kind of keep receipts, if you will, of everything you say, I think managers are sometimes hesitant to nail their colors to a particular mast when it comes to tactics and all that stuff, because they want to be able to change it in the future. So I thought that was really kind of brave, if that's the right word, of him to come out and just say, this is what I want to do, because now the expectation is set, right?
Yeah.
And I think Mark was always very forthcoming as well, but I think he was a little bit more diplomatic, if you will, in some of the things that he would say, and he was very guarded with tactics, especially on game day, which you can certainly understand, and we'll see how that kind of progresses when the season starts. But it was fascinating to see him really just come out and say exactly what it was he intended to do. It was also interesting to hear that he's already involved with transfers and that the keys are very much being given to him as technical director as well.
Yeah, he one of the first things that he talked about after he gave a little bit of background, which we discussed, he talked about his excitement to be joining a club that has this history of success and performing well. He mentioned more than once that he was drawn in by the fact that Locomotive, he kept using the word ambitious, and he used it kind of throughout the press conference. And one of the things that he highlighted early on was the fact that he was excited to be at a club that wants to win silverware, has a proven track record of success, and is ambitious because he said, I'm an ambitious coach and I want to play with, or I want ambitious players as well. Like, he wants Locomotive to be a launching point for the likes of like a Diego Luna or anyone coming through the club, not to use as not to say stepping stone or whatever, but a place that attracts ambitious players who are looking to raise their game to the next level.
And he actually said to that point, Phil, he said, I don't want them to stay in El Paso, which, like, out of context, you'd be like, what the hell?
Yeah.
But, like, in context, it made perfect sense. Like, he's very much interested in seeing players reach a higher level here and then reach their real potential in Europe, in MLS, South America, I mean, whatever it is.
Right.
And I thought that was really, really interesting. And I think I believe that because we have, players of that caliber, like a Diego Luna, who's currently, frolicking about in Portugal and Belgium right now. So I mean, that all makes sense to me. And I was really fascinated to hear that he did say the word ambitious more than once. And he too, it seems like he too also wants to push himself and coach at the highest level one day. So while we hope he'll be here for a while, and Alan Ledford said as much as well, that he'd like him to stay as long as he wants to. It's nice to see that he also has ambitions because you don't reach those heights without winning stuff, as he put it. So
yeah, that was a bit of a cheeky response from Alan with the because the question I think came from
#media trained.
I think Joe Rodriguez, our good friend from the Striker Texas, asked the simple question of can you share any details about his contract. And Alan cheekily said, we want to keep him here as long as he wants to be here. Which that was a nice diplomatic answer, and understandable why you wouldn't want to share the length of the contract, in the opening press conference. As common as that might be, common practice in Europe, I think, to announce like signs a deal till
for 2 years, 18 months, whatever. Yeah.
But I think in this case, it probably makes sense for Mountain Star to maybe play it closer to the vest. But so as we said, John opened up like pretty quickly about the style that he wants to play and even the formation tactics that he wants to employ. He started off that discussion by saying that we're going to play a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, depending on he sort of said like depending on how you look at it, I guess. Which you can, depending on the placement of the number 10 midfielder, whether it's or if you're playing a defensive midfielder, you could argue one versus the other. But he also said that he wants to add some pace and add some wingers to the team, and that's kind of where his focus is clearly in terms of adding players. I guess let's start with the 4-2-3-1 and 4-3-3 and how that looks different based on his comments from what we've seen from Mark for the past 3 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about either of these formations is you're going to have a lone striker. And that's not something we've employed very much since season 1, really.
Yeah.
It's well documented that our 2 goal scorers, Lucho Solignac and Aaron Gomez, make a great pair. So, right away, that's kind of like, well, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
And the thing about tactics these days and systems is that oftentimes the 4-2-3-1, the 4-3-3, whatever it is, even the diamond, those are off the ball positions. Sometimes they're not always where the players stand for the entirety of the game. Things move around and they're very fluid. So, with that said, I don't think fans should be like too concerned that people are already going to start being ostracized. But I do think that, we know that John has every intention to really bolster the squad. He talked about, what is it, 6 or 7 signings that they still want to make or something like that?
Yeah, Andrew Forrest at one point alluded to the fact that there were like 6 or 7 signings that John was working on. And I think fans can likely expect that he's going to want to get that business wrapped up pretty quickly because January 20th is the start of preseason. So he's basically got the holiday period to finish up this. Everyone else is going to be wrapping Christmas gifts and he's going to be wrapping up transfer negotiations. So,
and he's not even on American soil yet. He said he'll be arriving the first part of January, but he needs the embassy to kind of
work on
get going on that visa
or on his visa. Yeah. Yeah. Despite the fact that Mark played ostensibly a 4-4-2 diamond for a large portion of, I would say, the second half of his tenure. The initial stages, he played 4-3-3 kind of a lot, especially during season 1 with Jerome Kiesewetter as the lone striker, and then either like Edson Partida and Omar Salgado, sometimes even like I guess Gomez played out there. Gebhard played out there. Yeah, like so he played a number of
Saeed Robinson.
Yeah, different players on the wings. And even when he was playing the 4-4-2 diamond, in possession it was that diamond. Out of possession and in the press, it often resembled a 4-3-3 with the front 3 line of the number 10 who's at the top of the diamond and the 2 strikers pressing in a 3, and then the midfield dropping into a 3 and the back line being a 4. So it does, like you said, there is a lot of fluidity to tactics these days, and there's not necessarily as we've described and as you described in your piece, kind of like the chalk on the boots wingers who just stay out wide and they just go forward. Like that's kind of, but all that being said, since he's clearly set out this marker that he wants to play 4-2-3-1, like that was the initial thing that he said, which suggests that he wants to play with a number 10, but rather than playing with 2 strikers, he wants to play with 1 and he wants to play with wingers. That suggests a fairly large departure in style from the way that Mark played, just in terms of the personnel utilized, because last season we didn't have any recognized wingers on the team at all, because the system didn't call for it.
Right.
And the fact that he immediately locked in on and just outright said in a press conference, basically unprompted, that that's what he's looking to add to the team. It's a really interesting marker that he set out. And I think it says that it is going to be quite different from this, what we've seen, even though at times the shape may resemble some of what Mark did. The methods utilized in that shape are going to be really quite different.
For sure. Yeah. Another thing that John mentioned in the press conference that I thought was interesting was that, he talked about this brand of football that he wants to impose, but the other thing he said too was that he wants to entertain.
Yeah.
He wants to score a lot of goals. He says, I recognize that Locomotive fans come spend their hard-earned money at the stadium and they want to be entertained. And when he says that, you can definitely marry that with the comment about wanting wingers because, those are typically the entertaining, flashy players, the Diego Lunas, if you will. Because actually, I think Diego could probably play in a wide area and just drift in. But, I think the squad will definitely have to be bolstered. The thing that I think is crucial, and I kind of touched on this in my piece as well, is that midfield, I think, would need to be significantly strengthened. I think this team needs to get more athletic if we're going to play that way. Mm-hmm. And we've spoken about this over the years that, what we don't have in athleticism necessarily or youth that other teams do, we have really smart, high IQ, tactical players.
Yeah.
So I think that the athletic part of our team is going to have to evolve if we want to play the way that John is describing. And, to be fair to him, he's got a lot of pieces to work with, but we'll definitely have to add to that. So I think we'll see, I don't know, I guess more of a style or a system that people are used to watching, at the higher levels, because the diamond isn't that common everywhere. So but 4-2-3-1 certainly is. 4-3-3 definitely is. So maybe that also shows kind of his influences and the people and the clubs that he's worked for in the past and how he's come to settle on that system. But I think it's exciting. And we'll see how that goes.
As you said, his approach, he specifically mentioned and he said, quote, "We're going to have an aggressive team that presses high. I want the ball. When we lose the ball, I want every player moving to win it back." There were aspects of Locomotive, and I would say under Lowry, we picked our spots to press, and we did it in spurts, but you could tell when the press dropped off a little bit, and I think, you're not going to be able to press. You're not going to be able to press at 100% intensity for 90 full minutes unless you're just a team of psycho superhumans. But the demand is clearly going to be much higher in terms of the intensity of the press and the duration that we press for. Which, to your point, I do think that there is an evolution that's going to have to occur in terms of straight up endurance of the players on the field. And I think one of the things that I don't know that we've touched on it. Maybe we've touched on it a handful of times after losses at RGV. One of the things that we've noticed over the years is that we really benefited. And this past season, maybe it was the most starkly obvious that we really did benefit quite a lot from playing on a congested, smaller pitch at Southwest University Park. And certainly we can still take advantage of that. But I think in those away games, where we were playing on those big pitches, we really started to feel some of the age of the squad, some of the physical shortcomings, and it's not calling any specific player out. They have so many strengths, and I'm not saying that just because we can't press on a big field makes us bad or something like that. It's clearly a team of fantastic players. But if we're going to play this style, we're going to have to be able to play it, regardless of what field we're on, and we can't suddenly look totally at sea just because we're on a big pitch.
Right. And to that end, another thing that John spoke about was the youth academy and how he is very keen to see how our U19s play. And there's going to be a preseason game, I think, with the U19s or an intra-squad game.
Yeah. The first preseason friendly will be an intra-squad against the academy team.
Yeah, and John was very clear that he wants to hopefully promote one or two of those boys. So, right away you could tell that he knows the team needs to be, the average age needs to come down a bit. There needs to be a bit more youthful energy about this squad if we're going to play that way, I think. And there are some really talented players in the squad. We saw some of the academy boys make match day squads, over the summer with Mark Lowry. We know we have Harrison Shaw from Orlando City. We have Villarreal, Maldonado, like all those kids. So it'll be interesting to see how and if he can integrate them and who's going to make the cut, because it would be really cool to see like homegrown players show out for Locomotive. But the fact that he spoke about that shows me that is his intention, is to kind of give some youth to the team and make it more athletic, a bit more lean, a bit more agile, if you will.
And his focus on youth, obviously throughout his career, just lends itself so well to that connection with the academy and having this like holistic approach to Locomotive. I think it's something too that, we meme it a little bit when people like are upset that they've gone out and found like a talented player from elsewhere, and they're like, oh, someone that good like plays in El Paso, and you didn't need like you should have just promoted an academy kid or whatever.
Right.
The reality is that like most often at the professional levels, like there is a gap. But I think it's been shown now a handful of times that there are those players in the El Paso area and that can make that jump. And I think now that the structure exists of the academy, and we're actually those guys are getting training at a higher level and not just like, they're playing their club ball or like playing in high school or maybe like junior college, like that sort of thing. They're getting it like at a professional level, and even getting some exposure to the first team, as we saw with Villa Gomez and Maldonado and even some of the Barca residency kids, which it'll be interesting to see how if that pipeline stays open at all with Richie Ryan returning. But yeah, I think his focus on youth just lends itself so well to building the club as a whole, in addition to hopefully, getting good results as the manager, which brings us to the other side of the discussion, which is obviously you and I think we're quite optimistic about this appointment. We feel really good about the fact that he's got this like long history with some really, really good managers, some good mentors, and probably some good connections to draw on in terms of identifying players for USL who may not be, who may be outside of the normal networks and like the normal scope. But also now there are, people expressing their concerns because they don't know about John, and just like us, they're learning about him now. And some of those concerns have to do with his one stint as a actual head coach, which was one season with Sounders 2 in 2017. And that record is kind of making its way around as like his head coaching record. So what would you say, I guess, to the folks who see that his all-time record as a manager is like 6 wins out of 34 games?
Yeah, so like you said, he coached at Sounders FC2 in 2018. 34 matches coached. His record was 6 wins, 7 draws, 21 losses. That's about 0.74 points per match. Much, much less than you would expect, especially from Mark Lowry, for example. That only ended up earning him 25 points. You have to look at this in context, I think, because we know this from having played Tacoma Defiance in previous seasons, not this past one, but in previous seasons, that those MLS 2 sides, the focus is not necessarily on winning. I mean, I am fully aware Real Monarchs won a title at our expense. I get that.
That was also at a time when Real Salt Lake was horrible. And thus more MLS level players were playing on Real Monarchs by the time that the end of the season. Yeah.
Exactly. So with that being said, we have to understand that these MLS2 sides, and we know this,
I mean, Real Monarchs this year are a good example. They were terrible.
Terrible, because it's not about necessarily winning. It's about developing their players for MLS. And that's why MLS is now doing this MLS Next Pro whatever, because they want that pipeline. They want that minor league system.
Right.
And these clubs just so happen to be in USL Championship at that time. So is it a great record? No, it's terrible. Like, obviously. But I don't think his remit was winning at Sounders 2. And he had many different jobs in the Sounders organization. So it tells me they were happy with him and what he was doing. So, yeah, I mean, that's the only head coaching evidence that we can look to. And I understand that. But it doesn't really mean much to me in terms of what he might do at Locomotive, because that's a completely different remit, a completely different job.
Yeah.
When you're coaching one of those really reserve sides. And that's not what Locomotive is, not what's ever has been, and he knows that that's not what he's applied for. So
right.
That's kind of what I would say about it. It personally doesn't bother me too much. If it bothers someone else, like, by all means, you're allowed to have that opinion, but
sure.
Context is important, I think.
Yeah, and that's what there's basically two things that I would just bring to everyone's attention, I guess, or bring to, if presented with that stat. I have two things that I would point to. The first, the Real Monarchs example is a really good one, actually, because it shows how fickle a reserve side can be, because you can go feast to famine extremely quickly if your best players start making themselves known to the MLS team and they start getting pulled up. Martinez-less and Ochoa-less Real Monarchs this season finished with 5 wins, 7 draws, and 20 losses. So really not all that different from the record.
That's almost identical.
Yeah. And no one is having a go at Jamison Olave and having any sort of referendum on whether he's the right guy or whether he'll eventually be fit for another job, because he won the USL 2 years ago.
Facts.
So that's the first thing that I would point out. The second thing that I would point to is Mark Lowry. When he was hired by El Paso Locomotive, he had been in charge of Jacksonville Armada for 50 games. Now, his record is somewhat, I mean, it's kind of comparable almost, because they just played less games in NASL. They had less teams at the time, but as the manager of Armada, he was in charge for 50 matches in NASL, 16 wins, 19 draws, 15 losses. So really level across the board, nothing to write home about. And he didn't make the playoffs either year that he was in charge of Jacksonville in the NASL. His best season with them was in the NPSL, when they dropped down with like the same team into the amateur game because the NASL didn't exist anymore. So none of that predicted the fact that he would then win 44 games out of 90 with El Paso. That's, his previous record didn't belie that. It was really about a manager coming to a good situation, getting a backing from an ownership group that has serious ambitions about this team being good, and being able to manage those pieces extremely well and get the right performances out of them. So if they trust John to get the performances, it's not going to be the same as him managing a reserve side, because it's not going to be dependent on anyone except for Mountain Star giving him the backing to go out and get the players that he wants. And if then it doesn't work, then then it is what it is. But I don't think that anyone should be making any snap judgments based off of his record in one season of management at a reserve side. Because didn't Sounders probably won MLS that year or something like that.
I mean, it's them, Portland, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, and then look at other data points as well. How about the job that he most recently did, finishing second in a top flight league with the winningest Australian coach guiding him ever. Like, Paso Locomotive is an Australian legend.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot. There's levels to this, shall we say?
Right.
And I don't think we can write the guy off for one season of USL with a reserve side, as you said. Now, again, what happens on the pitch is going to be most important. None of us can say what that's going to be like. But I will say, I think that it's telling that a lot of our key players signed on for another year, not knowing perhaps at the time that they were signing who the manager was going to be. But it's to our knowledge that he has spoken already to all the players, remotely, of course. So I think that says something that some were even, announced as having signed this week. So, I mean, maybe the deals were sorted earlier, but I think it's just telling that the players have trust in Mountain Star that whatever comes next is going to be the right thing to move the club forward. So
he did mention, and it may have been the announcements this week, but he did mention that in the presser that he had been involved in some of the conversations that hadn't quite gotten over the line. So clearly he's had a little bit of an impact with at least these last few players signing back up. And I think the other thing that I took away from this and from the tweets surrounding it and all of that is that Mountain Star and the front office are extremely impressed with John and the conversations that they've had up till now. That obviously is, not even close to like half the battle, because being impressive in your conversations and being impressive on the pitch are two different things. But it's clear that he's built like quite a bit of goodwill at the club already in a really short amount of time. And they think this is the guy. And I mean, let's be real. They plucked a manager out of Jacksonville that wasn't on anybody's radar. I think you kind of have to like put yourself back into we weren't even named a Locomotive yet. No one knew what this team was going to be. Totally built it out of thin air. And now we're all like really like wringing our hands of like, is this the right guy to replace Mark? And the reality is like, we have to give him the same chance that we gave Mark, which is nobody had any assumptions about what Mark would accomplish like prior to him coming in. So let's just give John the chance to impress us. Like, now I'm not saying that it's, he can't be held accountable. Like we expect a high level, and we expect success, and we've been spoiled the last 3 seasons, but it's not to say that we should accept anything less than the best, but let's give John a shot at succeeding. And it doesn't do anyone any favors to write him off, because he is the boss. He's been handed the keys by the club, and it seems like he's making an impact early doors and has a really ambitious vision for where the club's going to go. So I'd say we just give him a shot and hope it works out for the best. And by the end, we're, sad when he moves on as well, because we've hired, extremely, extremely well, of the managers we've had in charge. So yeah, for
sure. And that's not to say that there won't be some growing pains. I think it would be kind of weird if there wasn't. And even in the early days of Lowry era, some of those games were bleak, guys. Like, don't forget where you came from, where we were not scoring for weeks.
We conceded 8 seconds into his tenure. It's okay. Like, it doesn't take away anything that happened after that, but
true.
But yeah, don't expect him to come storming out of the blocks. This is hard. This shit is hard.
Very much so. Yeah.
But it'll be fascinating to see him take over. And he does take over a club that has signed up 13 returning players. from last season, which pretty stunning business. Like, I think a lot of us were really thinking that this was going to be a summer of really, a off season of really high turnover, an off season of uncertainty, of not really knowing what the team is going to look like next year, because Mark was so integral to recruiting a lot of these players to come here. And in the end, there are a couple of key departures, but the returnee list is pretty lengthy, and there's a lot of minutes and a lot of goals in the returnees.
I mean, personally, for me, the must returns that I wanted, for the most part, have all come back. I mean, we've somehow managed to keep Diego Luna for one more year, which I don't think anyone would have begrudged him a move to MLS or Europe or what have you. So Diego, and then of course the strike partnership that combined for 20 goals. Aaron Gomez, who is definitely loco through and through at this point, and Lucho Solniak, who was an absolute revelation for us and just a different level of quality that I don't think we've seen in this side before him. Both of them returning. Richie Ryan, a veteran, someone that can help John in guiding this locker room, I think, and someone who shows that he's got nous on the touchline as well as in the scouting department. So maybe he can do a bunch of different jobs in the squad while still being a player for us. We've kept a lot of really important pieces. A lot of pieces coming back too. I think now it'll be really interesting to see if he can get a new lease on life in Locomotive, as we are kind of privy to the fact that it didn't necessarily work out that first year. And he was sent on loan, had a really good loan spell at Memphis. Just a lot of really decent pieces sticking around. Now, the loss of Mishak Jerome, I think, is huge, to be fair.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's necessarily that surprising, because he's definitely a Mark Lowry player. And so, that's a big shame. Brian Rebillon is a shame too. I think, just one of those like box office players, gets you out of your seat with some of the skills he would do. Did a bunch of different jobs for the team, did it well, very professional, a little bit injury prone at times. So, also follows Mark to Indy. And then, Jose Aguinaga, of course, as departed as well. I don't think Jose got to make the impact that perhaps he or we wanted him to.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, very professional in his season with Locomotive. So
a couple of big goals too for him.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Some big ones that he came up with. So, I mean, overall, I'm feeling really good about the state of the squad. And I think John must be raring to go, because this is such a nice spine of a team to walk into.
Yeah.
And then he can just kind of augment that with his own touches. So
yeah, I was certainly I was pleased with because Andrew Forrest shared during the press conference that, obviously the timing of contract renegotiations or some of the decisions that they had already made in terms of players that were on multi-year deals and all of that stuff, which I've been increasingly impressed with the club in terms of the amount of players that they've locked down to multi-year deals. I think season 1, it was very much like flying by the seat of our pants and like, oh my God, everybody's on a 1-year contract, and like what even happens now? The remainder of the squad now, like a lot of guys on multi-year deals. I think it was revealed that Diego Luna was actually on a 3-year deal, so he's technically like with the club till next season. But regardless, the spine of the team and what Andrew Forrest pointed to is just like some of the decisions they needed to make without John, because they needed to, make sure that they were locking down players, or at least like getting them back into talks before they started looking elsewhere. The spine that they've given him, the foundation that they've given him, I think is really impressive, and a good starting point for a manager, especially when you think about the standards. And I think that's really like what will be so important is the group that's remained, especially the likes of, Maka, Andrew Fox, Itabarelli, Richie, as you mentioned. And then, the host of attacking mids and forwards, plus Chapa keeping the local presence as well. That group is not going to accept anything less than they're someone's best, day in and day out during training, and they're going to demand high standards from anyone coming into the squad. So yeah, like you said, I think it does help John out immensely in setting the standard and the expectation for the coming year. I think, now, as they said, this is a really great spot to be starting from, because he did say that he's going to maintain, not dissimilar to Mark, a relatively small squad in that 22, 23 player mark. I think his goal is likely going to be similar to Mark's in that there is no, we don't carry anyone on the squad just to make up the numbers. We want 22 people or 23 that all can contribute, whether off the bench or, in bit starting roles, or as the main piece. So, I think the really interesting thing now is just what are those pieces that he's targeting, and what we know positionally kind of what he's looking for. And I think we know too that there is this still relatively big unknown floating out there, which is the status of Logan Ketterer, and whether our number one will be back next year after he, flirted with MLS, had his brief stint, and now he notably has not been announced as returning. I think Nick Ross is the other one that's kind of floating out there in terms of is this someone that's going to be back? And I'd imagine the talks are probably ongoing, because I think those two are players where if we're sitting at 15 returnees with those two, plus whoever, if we're talking about 6 or 7 signings, then you're talking about kind of the complete roster. That's pretty much everyone. So, yeah, I think it'll just be fascinating now to see where he builds from here, because, the squad, despite the fact that we've returned quite a big spine, you add 6 players. That's a pretty new look team, for when you're talking about 6 or 7 new signings. That's a lot to integrate.
Yeah, and another thing that John pointed out about, I think it was prompted by Joe's question, was kind of how he thinks of the squad makeup, and he did say he wants to keep a small squad. Yeah, which I thought was interesting, because we struggled with injuries. So I wonder, I guess, how that will work. And, with that being said, he also is going to be bringing in some of his coaching staff. From what we understand, there will be some changes to the backroom staff. So, just everything's changing. It's all very exciting. Yeah. And there's just a lot of unknowns, but it's just nice. It's a weight off. I think you and I spoke about it before we hit record, that it's just nice to know who it is now. Now we can speculate about other stuff, right? Not the boss itself. So
yeah, and I think there was a certain level of, I don't want to say discomfort creeping in, but there was that nagging sensation at the back of everyone's mind, I think, of okay, whose decisions are these? As players are returning, right. It's okay, who's making these calls? Which, we have there's plenty of people at the club who are capable of making these decisions. But at the same time, it's okay, you sign a bunch of people back up. We don't have a manager. What if he doesn't want any of these not any of these players? Because obviously there's a ton of quality in the returnees. But what if he's looking for something completely different than, a certain player that we've now locked down? and it creates this whole weird dynamic. So it's good to know that he's spent some time working, with the squad and connecting with the current squad to make sure that they understand like who he is and what he wants to bring. And I think it's also super encouraging that a handful of players, essentially signed on the dotted line, like after they knew it was him, which is, that's a cool thing, given the fact that, like I said it before, a lot of these players were recruited by Mark and had history with Mark in one way or another, whether they played against him, his Armada teams or they had, whatever like tangential connections to him. But the fact that so many players who were kind of Mark guys, the fact they've stuck around just to me says that they're encouraged by the project as well. And I think at the end of the day, the other thing that it just shows is that Mountain Star has done a good job of compensating the players to a level that is competitive. And you don't have a ton of turnover, because I think a lot of other USL sides try to get by with like bare minimum type contracts for these guys, and they go to the teams that are going to be serious about it. And I think one thing that we can know now after this is our fourth off season, and the fact that we've been able to retain such like continuity year to year is indicative of the fact that Mountain Star has put their money where their mouth is.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that we have a decent amount of players who will have been with the club for 4 years. Like, these are Locomotive legends in the making. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they are really part of the identity of the club. And there are big clubs in USL that are revolving doors. And so it's really amazing that we've managed to keep some of these folks, like you said. I mean, it just adds to that identity, right? Like Foxy, that's a Locomotive guy. Logan Ketterer, Sebastian Velasquez coming back. Like all these different like storylines around the squad are
Gomez
really
being the like top
the
scorer,
eternal loan, but now permanent, I guess. So
and
sure.
And this is no shade, but I know that Harry will listen to this, and this is it's something that he's expressed. San Antonio FC fan, friend of the pod, but he's expressed often about the amount of turnover and kind of the lack of announcements that like immediately postseason that San Antonio makes. And so that's a good club. They make the playoffs really regularly, and they have a really good coach, and they have a really good youth system. They have like all these positives going for them. But they are a bit of a revolving door. Like, they kind of rely on some of those USL players who have kind of made the rounds, and they do change quite a bit. They find ways to be successful, like with the change. But I think it was in our game against San Antonio, the San Antonio commentators were remarking on the fact that we had like 6 players in our starting 11 that had made 50 or more appearances for the club, and they only had 1 player in their starting 11 that was like at that number. And I think now, now we're approaching the point where we're going to have Centurions this season. Like, we're going to have players who have made 100 appearances for the club, which is nuts. Like, that's insane that we're going to have players
Centurions
that are crossing the 100 mark in their 4th season. So yeah, it's just, and that's with a COVID shortened season. So, because Mark took charge in 90 games. So yeah, we'll have a handful of players who get to that mark this year if they play, 15, 20 games. And, so yeah, the continuity they've been able to cultivate, over 4 seasons now is really impressive. But now we have this injection of fresh blood and a new set of ideas, a new network of potential players, a new, network of coaches, a new staff, in the back room. And so there is a lot of change going on at the club, despite them being able to retain a lot of the spine. And it's exciting. I mean, like you said, it could go a lot of different ways. Like, we could get off to a stormer, who knows? Like, or we could we could struggle to like cope, initially, or cope with the changes or assert the style. But regardless of how it goes, I'm just excited that, like you said, like, we've removed one of the variables, and now we get to see how the rest of it comes together over the next couple of months.
Absolutely. And I know people have already been in the mentions talking about, when's John going to be on the show? We're working on it.
Yeah.
He's in Australia. So like, timing wise, it would just be a mess right now, but we're going to try our best to get him on here and put him through the Seriously Loco ringer, if you will.
And we're already in contact with the team to make it happen. It's just, I think it may have to wait till he's stateside, to make it make sense. But,
right.
But yeah, he will. Well, as long as he agrees to it, he'll be on the show. But I think signs are good. So you guys will be the first to know when John appears. But just exciting stuff around the club, and we'll obviously be covering it head to toe. So as we said at the top of the show, check out Mikka's piece on our Patreon on potential signings that are floating out there in the USL, who might fit the style. And I think, like you said, it's aged extremely well, because all of those players could fit in this system that's being proposed by John. And then hopefully I'll have a piece up about John here in the next couple of days, probably by Monday. If you want, you can subscribe to the Patreon. It's a couple of bucks a month, and it helps out the pod. We don't keep any of that money. I promise. There's a lot of costs with this. So anyways, if you feel like supporting us, it's, we really appreciate it. And then, you can find the pod, like I said, on all the major podcast platforms, and, you can find us, on Twitter at Seriously Loco, and then on Insta at Seriously_Loco. And I think that's pretty much it.
I think that's it, guys. And hey, for those of you who have perused the Patreon and read the pieces, if you have requests too, let us know, because sometimes we just hit writer's block, and that's why we fall off with that stuff. But if there's stuff you want to see, written about, let us know, because that helps us too.
Yeah.
But of course, the podcast will always be our primary kind of outlet, and that'll remain free, obviously. So, and the Patreon pieces always get released anyway for everyone to read. If you don't have a buck or two to spare, that's no problem.
Yeah, they get unlocked after a couple of days at most. So, we'll never completely paywall our stuff, because that's no fun. But I guess we'll be waiting for the next batch of Loco announcements, and hopefully we'll have a bunch of players to talk to as well. We did last season our Getting Loco series, on all the new signings at the beginning of the season, and I'd love to be able to get the players on the pod as well, and do some interviews here in the preseason. So those will probably be the first batch of episodes as we head into the new season. But Mikka, we made it to season 4.
My God, it's incredible. Thanks for everyone who's been on the ride with us. I don't know what I thought this would grow into, but we've really got ourselves a little community here, and it's really awesome.
Yeah. No, so thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode, and we will be back soon. And until then, stay loco.